boppy music. Hi, welcome back here. We're going to talk about James chapter 2 this time.
This time around, James chapter 2. Here we go.
What would you say were 2 points that James talks about in this chapter?
In chapter 2, he's going to talk about favouritism, the sin of favouritism.
The sin of favouritism.
The sin of favouring one over another.
Okay, so like choosing one child over another child.
That could be an issue. Patriarchs might have had that problem. Jacob had that problem.
Yeah.
Isaac had that problem. Yeah, and he's talking about it in the concept, oftentimes in the concept of rich and poor, which we've sort of talked about in a previous
So favouring rich people or poor people?
Favouring, well, actually both, but he's really having a go at favouring rich, the temptation to give the rich special treatment because of something, the leverage that you'll then have with them because they're rich. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So he's saying, which is obviously a common problem, but you know, he's a big advocate for equality. So he's, you know, that's the context, is make sure that you value all people equally. So that's the whole sort of the first half of chapter 2. Then the second half of chapter 2, he's going to move into the ethical implications of your faith. It's where he famously says, we'll get there. Faith without works is dead. That we need, that's the stuff. We talked about an introduction episode about why Martin Luther wanted to throw the book out, because James seems to be advocating for, you know, you need to do stuff in order to be saved.
Yes.
That's not what James is advocating for. We'll see, but that's what Luther was worried about.
Okay, and that's what Christianity says. You don't have to do anything, but this book seems to say something else.
Yes, and that has been, to be perfectly honest, that has been a major rift between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism for 500 years. And I think, to be honest, I think that contextually I understand why we needed to do that, because the Catholic Church at the time had heavily favoured works, and it wasn't biblical works. It was paying money to the church, or it was, you know, there were kinds of rituals that they had to go through that earned them, that they were taught, okay, if you do these things, if you say enough prayers, if you give enough money, if you hail enough Marys, etc., you will eventually...
I think it's just one Mary. You hail
exactly.
multiple times.
Multiple times, yeah. That's right. If you do that somehow you'll be saved. And that's what Luther was coming up against. But what we've often done as Protestants is we've gone the other way, and we forget that works do matter, and that we then think that it doesn't matter how we live as long as we have faith. And James is going to bring this other aspect that we talked about in the introductory episode. He's going to bring that to other side of that argument together. And we're going to see that then Paul and James aren't actually in contradiction with one another when we get there in that second part of chapter 2.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Good.
Yes.
Well, don't take my word for it. Don't do that. You can learn from my word, because I've learned from others, but do your own research, Jeanie.
All right. Okay. So we're going to talk about favouritism.
Yes, they're going to start with that. Yep.
All right. And he says here in verse 1, my dear friends, don't let public opinion influence how you live out your glorious Christ-originated faith.
Gee, he likes the adjectives, doesn't he?
Yes. This is the Message Bible.
The Message Bible.
If a man enters your church wearing an expensive suit and a street person wearing rags comes in right after him, and you say to the man in the suit, sit here, sir, this is for the best seat in the house, and either ignore the street person or say, better sit here in the back row, haven't you segregated God's children and proved that you are judges who can't be trusted? That's quite a statement.
Yeah, it is, but I think it's a pretty hopefully our listeners are mature enough in their faith. If you've been around Christ's values for long enough, you'll know that intuitively Jesus is not advocating for showing favouritism to some people over others. Surely there's something that should repulse us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yet I see this so much in my life, how the rich people are treated in such a different way to the poor people. So I think this is counterintuitive to the way that we live.
To the way of the world.
Yes.
And you would see that working in the movie industry. Heck, I can only imagine it would be.
Well, yes, we see a lot of very wealthy people.
Yes, you do. And they expect and want all that treatment. And
well, they don't even expect it. It's just given.
Right. Is it given for the motive here? Like if I give that respect, I might get something back from it.
Yes.
I might get favoritism. I might get to produce the next movie. I might get to
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's real life. What James is talking about.
Very
and in
much
church
so.
life, it's like, oh, okay, you're obviously rich. You've got more tithes. Come on in.
Well, yeah. As a pastor, if you see a very wealthy person
That's
in,
the
do you
temptation.
think, oh wow, that they might give a lot of money to the church?
That's the temptation, and it can even be twisted to go, and then that money could be used to help more people. And you know how you can twist it in your own head. That's true. If a millionaire walks in the door, billionaire walks in the door and you think, millionaires don't mean much these days, but a billionaire walks in the door and you think, okay, well, there's money there. We could build 10 churches without it. We could do all that. That's all true and noble. But you see how subtly that could twist away to some form of selfish favoritism. And that's what James is getting at. We should never value one person over another because of the amount of money they have.
Do you know Kevin Bacon?
I do.
The actor?
I know 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
He recently dressed up as not
I've
himself.
heard this story.
Yeah, I don't know how
Have
he
you
made
told me
himself.
this?
No, it wasn't
No?
me. And he went about living his day as a non-famous poor person, and he hated it. He's like, I need to be famous. Like, I can't stand life not being famous and wealthy.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I thought I'd heard that story, but that's not how I remembered it going.
Oh, well, what did you hear?
No, I remembered him saying that well, maybe it was, but it was more that he was surprised at how poorly he was treated as a.
Oh, there's that angle too.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yes.
That might have been what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. And most people are poorly treated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because people just don't think anything of the person with bad clothes.
Yeah. So there's a perception focus coming into it. And if you think about it in a patriarchal, rich system like the Roman Empire, where there were wealthy landowners and there were very few who were rich, and then the poor was the majority of the population, you can see why James is so concerned about this infiltrating the church, because this is a sinful human worldly value which Jesus completely upended.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is a flip of culture here, isn't it?
Totally different flip of culture.
Yeah. And would have this been common? Were other people at this time saying this?
Not at all. In fact, and still the same. You go to India today, and in India today, because of the whole karma system, you don't upset the apple cart, because the mentality is the poor are poor because they deserve to be poor, because somehow they've done something in a previous life, and it's actually wrong for you to elevate the poor because you're doing a disservice to them, and they deserve it. They deserve to be poor. And it was very much the same in Roman culture. And so into that comes the message of Christ, which elevates the vulnerable and the weak and the marginalized, which has always been the value of the kingdom. It is countercultural. In fact, it was one of the primary countercultural values that stood the early church apart, and it was ultimately the thing that the early church was built upon. The people were attracted to the church because the poor especially were attracted to the church for this very reason, because they were accepted and loved, and they weren't looked down on. That's why James is speaking so harshly against it.
Because poor people were considered like sinners, right? Like something bad had happened to them because they deserved it to happen.
That was a big part of it.
And rich people were considered blessed by God.
Yep.
But this is saying, hang on a minute, in the church culture, rich people and poor people are the same. They need to be sitting next to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
You should be sitting at the same table enjoying the same meal.
And treated exactly the same way.
Which is why in 1 Corinthians, Paul is doing the similar thing. He's hard on the rich Christians for sitting down eating the Lord's Supper while the poor people aren't, because he's saying this is the world's value. This isn't the kingdom of God's value. It's favoritism.
There's so much value placed on people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
On poor people, I should explicitly say there, because that's what the text is
it's
talking about
here. But I think any kind of vulnerable, marginalized group, anyone that isn't in a position of influence in society, are the ones that the Lord champions. Because the reason then that there is inequality is human sin. So it makes sense to me that God would come against human sin.
And favoritism is sin.
And favoritism is sin.
Okay, if we go with the theme that we talked about, that sin is actually when you hurt the image of God within another. How are you hurting the image of God within a person here?
When you're showing favoritism?
Yeah.
You're clearly devaluing the person who you're not showing favor to. You're saying you're not worth anything, or you're worth less than the other person. So that's sinning against the poor person. And I would argue that we're actually sinning against the rich person as well. Because,
in what way?
Well, I think because we're potentially feeding pride. We're actually feeding into a culture that enables pride to develop in that person.
And would it give them some sort of sense of entitlement to continue treating poor people the way they did? Because they would have just been walking through a temple or whatever, and the poor people would have to step to the side. And we're using the word poor here because
that's the
scripture
context
is
of what
using
James
the word
is saying.
poor.
Yes, and poor people here
or
is very
street people, he
Yep,
says here.
Yep, that's right.
Which is even kind of worse in
Yes.
our day and age to say that way.
Yeah.
Say it that way.
That's right. And I think that so then potentially perpetuates the problem of human selfishness. And that's an antithesis to the values of the God's kingdom.
And here, this is verse 5 to 7. Listen, dear friends, isn't it clear by now that God operates quite differently?
Yeah, there we go. Upside down kingdom.
This would have been shocking to hear that you should be treated well either way. It's been shocking because the rich people wouldn't have liked sitting next to the poor people. That's upside down kingdom.
Yep.
And the poor people would have been sitting next to these rich people going, wow, I'm actually valued.
Yeah, that's right. Opposite value of the kingdom, hey?
Yes.
Opposite value to the world's, the kingdom values are opposite to the world's values. Yeah, upside down. For sure. And it's a different way of life, completely different way of life. It should have been the way God's laws in the Torah are designed to do just this, to point towards these values. But even at the time of Jesus, you've still got this happening in the Jewish community. You've got the religious elites who look down on the sinful, marginalized poor people as though they are more important or more blessed because they're wealthier or more successful. It's so opposite, even for the Jewish community, to what God intended.
In our culture right now, we do this through Instagram. Like the people who have more followers have more value. They have more influence, supposed influence. Therefore, we sort of follow them and we turn up to shopping malls where this influencer appears and things, and we disregard the people who have only 10 followers. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And what value are we placing? Are we putting our value in the wrong spot just because someone has a larger influence? Maybe because they're more resourced, they've got more money behind them to put into socials or whatever it might be. I think we run the risk of doing exactly the same thing. You can make a valid point.
Yes, we do.
Yep. And it's not a kingdom value.
And here in verse 5 to 7, he chose the world's down and outs as the kingdom's first citizens with full rights and privileges.
Isn't that good?
That's another quite shocking statement.
Yeah.
You have full rights and privileges, though you have an empty wallet.
Yes. Amen.
Which means you don't have to pay money to go to church.
That's
you don't
right.
have
You
to
don't
actually
have to
tithe.
have stuff.
Yeah.
You don't have to have stuff.
You can turn up.
You can just come. The door is open to everybody to enter God's kingdom.
It actually says it here. This kingdom is promised to anyone who loves God. And here you are. Oh, well, this is quite chastising. Here you are abusing these same citizens. Isn't the high and mighty who exploit you, who use the courts to rob you blind? Hang on. Did I say that right? Isn't it the high and mighty who exploit you, who use the courts to rob you blind? So that's an interesting way to look at it. It's like you kind of worship the rich person, but the rich person is also exploiting you.
Ah, yes.
It's sort of like this weird cycle.
Yeah. I'm going to keep my views on certain politicians out of that. But yeah, that's exactly the point, is that we worship the people of influence, but then the sinful nature of the people in influence is that they don't care about you. They want to use you for their benefit, for more of their benefit. That's dangerous. It's stupid on our part if we somehow worship people or put people on a pedestal because they have more influence or more power or more money, because they're not thinking the same thing about you. That's what James is saying. They're actually just thinking about how they can use your followership to gain more power and more influence.
Yeah, it actually says here they scorn you. They scorn the new name Christian.
Yes, let's not be like that.
You'll do well when you complete the royal rule of the scriptures. Love others as you love yourself. Hang on, is that really in the Bible? Love others as you love yourself. Isn't that the golden rule?
The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is the one that's really.
Isn't that the similar thing?
Similar thing.
Love others as you love yourself. So that is actually in the Bible.
That's actually in the Bible.
Wow.
Who
would have thought?
Love your neighbor as yourself. Yep.
Because people say that, and where does that come from?
It's
I don't know.
straight out
It
of the
comes
Bible.
from the Bible.
I think it might have been, it's actually out of the book of Deuteronomy, quoted by Jesus, saying, that all the law and the prophets is summed up in love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Two laws equally important, Jesus says. And he says you want to take every law in the Old Testament, this is why he calls it the royal law, because you can sum them all up in those two phrases. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Kingdom law, royal law.
Royal law, kingdom law.
Rule, as he says, yeah.
Yeah.
If you play up to these so-called important people, you go against the rule and stand convicted by it. You can't pick and choose in these things, specializing in keeping one or two things in God's law and ignoring others. So you can't love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind without loving the poor. Is that what it's saying?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And
Yeah.
also you can't love the Lord your God and show favoritism to people.
Because you're
Certain
not
kind of people.
loving your neighbor as yourself when you do that.
Interesting. It gets you, doesn't it?
It's very practical.
Yeah, it is practical, but it's also revealing, because you can see moments in your life where you're trying to love the Lord your God, but you are actually giving this certain group of person more importance.
Some sort of importance over the
and
others.
that one
Yep.
less. And so you really have to keep checking yourself.
Constantly evaluating ourselves, studying ourselves, Paul says, to see if we're really in the faith. 1 John 4 says, this is love, this is love, that God loved us and that we love others. But he says things like, how can we say we love God whom we have seen if we do not haven't seen, unless we love our brother or sister whom we have seen? So John is illustrating the same point, that you cannot separate your love for God from your love for your neighbor. They must go hand in hand. If you're angry with your brother or sister or whatever the case might be, you're holding that resentment or bitterness in your heart or favoring some over another, all of those things are counterintuitive to having the love of God in our heart.
What if, though, my neighbour disagrees with me?
Oh, well, in that case, you just have free carte blanche approval to just cancel them.
Thank you for saying that. I feel so vindicated.
And by the way, I'm just joking, folks. That's the kingdom of this world's value. If someone hurts you, not important to you, disregards you, cancel them. That is the opposite of kingdom of God values.
But what if I believe so much of the Bible, I'm so committed to loving the Lord my God with all my heart and soul and mind, that for me to do that, that is to tell my neighbour next door who disagrees with me, who despises everything that I believe in, isn't it my right, or shouldn't I be acting in the name of God by telling my neighbour how wrong they are?
I've heard that argument. So it's the unloving thing to do, not to tell someone.
Yes, isn't it?
It can be, yeah. I think it can be at times.
I was not expecting you to say that.
I think it can be, but I think it's weaponized. So we use that as an excuse for unchristian-like behavior. So it's not saying, it might be the most loving thing to do to let your neighbor know that you don't agree, or your neighbor to know that you have a certain value system that you live by. To keep that quiet isn't necessarily the right thing to do. That would be tantamount to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount saying, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. Let your light shine that others might see it. So I think it's often the loving thing to do to let your light shine. It's not the unloving, it's not wrong, it's not right to cover it completely. But
it's let your light shine, but it doesn't say let your light burn.
That's right. That's the point. You hit the nail on the head, because he'll say that others may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven, is what Jesus says. So it isn't, I think Christians, in an effort to say, we're being loving, therefore we're just speaking the truth at people. If it's really, truly about other people, we want to speak it in a way that has the best chance of influencing them towards the light.
Isn't the best way of speaking actually acting?
Yeah, and that's what James is going to talk about all through the book of James. It's
okay.
not that you don't talk.
I'm on point.
It's not that you don't talk. It's not that you don't do those things, but your actions should back up your words. Your actions should shine brightly. So it may be that you have a disagreement with your neighbour about certain values, whatever they might be. Could be pick your hot topic of choice. You might have a different value system to your neighbour, but in a healthy, godly environment, your neighbour may understand that you have a different value system, but they shouldn't always think, but you value them as an individual. You care about them. They always know, hey, if I need anything, Jeanie's there for me. I think that's the way to look at it. And it's about that pushing back we talked about in the last episode. If you stop pushing back, then they're not going to keep pushing against you. And when they need something, you're there in a heartbeat. I think you can hold your values, you can let your light shine, but do it in a way that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. That's ultimately the most loving way to live.
Is the thought agree to disagree a loving act?
Oh, I think it is. I think it's something that we've lost in today's culture. I think it comes from valuing the dignity of another person enough to acknowledge God has given them free will. Therefore, it's incumbent on me to honour that free will and say, I don't see it your way, but I still dignify you in your choice. And I want you to know that I believe you have the value to make that choice. I don't agree with it, but I still value you as an individual. I think that's a loving thing to do. What do you think?
Well, I think it is too, but I thought you might say, well, at some point, maybe we do need to disagree. No, I don't know.
Well, I think, I don't think, see, this is it. I'm not advocating for just hiding your lamp. I think that in a healthy environment, if you've got a good bridge of relationship with a person, you should be able to create a culture where you're able to let your light shine without it coming across in a demeaning way that leaves them thinking, oh, those Christians are just judgmental, hypocrites. That's what we're trying to avoid, because we're trying to win people to Jesus. We're not trying to fight for our faith. We're trying to win people. The motive is others-centered. So whatever I need to do to win as many as possible, I'll do that. That's the point that Paul says. I'm prepared to give up certain things, values that I have. I'll live like a Jew when I'm with the Jews. I'll live like a Gentile when I'm with the Gentile. I've become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might win some. I think that's the view that we should be our guiding light, not some sense of misdirected tenacity that says we have to stand up for Jesus. We have to fight for our rights. That's where we've missed the point, because that's ultimately not going to win other people. What is going to win other people is the truth spoken in love.
And being non-judgmental. This whole favoritism is sin thing.
It's a judgment, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a judgment thing. So you don't judge a person based on the way that they look. You don't judge them by the fact they disagree with you. They are just people, worthy of God's love.
Yep.
And they have God's love in the same way that we do.
That's right. Yep. And if they can sense that from us, we've got the best chance of ultimately winning them to faith. So there's a fine line there between you have to tell people what you believe, but you have to do it in a way that lets people know that you love them regardless of whether they agree with you or not.
It's not just winning them either. It's actually proving the scriptures that it's built on love.
Yes.
I'm actually showing that light by just standing there in love.
You got it. That's so good, Jeanie.
Yes.
Yep.
Well,
very good.
I'm going to just jump ahead here. So
go ahead.
Talk and act like a person expecting to be judged by the rule that sets us free. For if you refuse to act kindly, you can hardly expect to be treated kindly. Kind mercy wins over harsh judgment every time.
That's what we should have just let Eugene tell us. That sums up our conversation right there. Yes.
Yeah, it does. That's true. We should live like that.
Yep. That's the pattern that James is trying to get across to us here.
And I could do with a lot more of this in my life.
I think we all could.
Yeah. Acting more kindly, speaking kindly.
Yep.
Yeah. I need to read this over and over and over
again. Oh, we
need
to saturate us. Like you said in the introduction, I think we need like a podcast verse on this book. It's very rich, very deep and dense.
Yep. I've written to myself here, kind mercy is key.
I like it. Kind mercy is key. Very good.
The next section here is going to talk about faith in action.
Faith and works. Yep.
This is the part that people, Martin Luther
and other Protestants
don't like.
Yeah.
All right. So, dear friends, do you think you'll get anywhere if if you learn all the right words but never do anything? Does merely talking about faith indicate that a person really has it? For instance, you come upon an old friend dressed in rags and half-starved and say, "Good morning, friend. Be clothed in Christ, be filled with the Holy Spirit," and walk off without providing so much as a coat or a cup of soup. Where does that get you? Isn't it obvious that God talk without God acts is outrageous nonsense?
God talk without God acts is outrageous nonsense. Yep. That's true.
Yeah. It is true. This is true. It is calling you into action.
Yes, it's a call to works.
And I don't have a problem with that, like Martin Luther would have.
Tell me more.
Well, I don't have a problem with the idea that I have to give somebody a cup of coffee if they need what is it?
Yes.
Sorry, with a cup of soup.
Yes.
If they need it,
Yep.
That's not proving my faith. That's an example of my faith.
Right. So that's where Martin Luther must have got it wrong. I haven't done enough research into why he did. But I think, as I said on the introduction episode, I think it's got something to do with the fact that he felt that it was feeding back into that loop of salvation by works.
And legalism.
Yeah. So it's feeding back into that. And I think the key here is it's the order of these processes. It's faith without works is dead, not faith comes from works. Because he'll go on and he'll say, you say you have faith. He says, great, show me your faith by what you do, the way you live. So it's more that we have faith in Christ. We have our salvation by faith, by grace through faith alone. But because now we have that, it's incumbent on us to live a life that looks different, live a life that illustrates these kingdom values, like a cup of soup to someone in need. It's not that the cup of soup somehow earns us favor with God and we earn our salvation. But James's argument is, if you truly have faith, the natural byproduct of that will be you'll give out the cup of soup. It won't be that you'll look at that person that's poorly dressed and say, but anyway, have a good day, mate. You're saved. Off you go.
Yeah.
That's the natural fruit of a life that has truly experienced God's grace will be this kind of thing coming out of us. And this is where I question where Luther was coming from, because this is not unique to James. Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit is right there, Galatians 5. He's saying if you've truly got the Spirit in you, these will be the fruit. The fruit will be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, which is one of the primary verses, I've already quoted it a few times here, for it is by grace through faith, it is by faith through grace. No, we're right the first time, but it's by grace through faith that you have been saved. This is not from your works, from yourself. It is a gift of God. For we are God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works, works which he prepared in advance for us to do. And I think where Luther and the hyper-Protestant thing goes is it's like we like to quote Ephesians 2:8, where it says we've been saved by grace, but we forget the rest of the thought that continues on that says, therefore, because you're saved by grace, it's incumbent on you to live a life of works, not to earn your salvation, but it's a natural byproduct of true salvation.
I think his problem is this. If you read it one way, you could interpret that it would be by works, salvation by works. So, for example, if you go and you dedicate your life to giving cups of soup to people, you are going to think the more cups you give out, the greater chance of salvation, or the greater your reward in heaven. But he's actually, it's the opposite. It's your salvation is just based on Christ. So I think he was worried that there's people who are going to misunderstand it and think that it is all about just doing works and works will get me there.
Yes, and that would have been a very valid concern in the 1500s. I actually think that I have as equally valid concern that in the Protestant church in the 2000s that we run the risk of the exact opposite of that we come to the point where we think our works don't matter because we're saved by grace. So it doesn't matter. It won't have any influence or impact. It's pointless me going and doing those social justice things. It's pointless me going to the soup kitchen because it's not going to earn me anything. It's actually, and so what we've done is we've bought into this lie that says it's not important whether we do those things because we're saved by grace. And I reckon that's our risk. That's our danger. We should be, what James is saying here is he's telling us, prove your faith. If I can't see what's in your heart, but I can see you serving the poor. I can see you showing equality, not favoritism. He said that's the evidence of what's in your heart. And I reckon we're at a different time and a different risk than Luther was up against 500 years ago.
I can see what you're saying there. I just want to go to one point. When James is writing this, how many people were outside the temple giving cups of soup?
How many people were outside the temple giving cups of soup?
Yeah. How many people were giving hospitality to the poor?
I suspect not many.
Not many. Okay. And how many people would have been revering the wealthy?
Yeah, a lot.
Everyone.
Yes. So that's the culture he's talking to.
Okay. So he's speaking to a culture that needs to give cups of soup to people because there weren't social systems that provided it. Mm-hmm. There weren't charities. There weren't any of what we have today. Mm-hmm. But he's creating a new kind of person, or Jesus is creating a new kind of person that actively goes and helps the poor people,
Yep.
those who need hospitality.
Yep. That does not excuse the modern 21st century
No.
Christian
No.
from thinking that I've got my faith, I don't need to do works.
Okay, so back to that. So it's like some people think, oh, I believe in God. Yes, I believe in him, but I don't need to alter my behavior in any way
That's what
whatsoever.
as a
let
pastor, that's my
alone
biggest concern.
serving cups of soup.
Yeah, let alone going that far.
Yeah.
I don't even need to alter my behavior in any way because I'm saved now.
And another way to look at this is, or can I look at it this way? You can shed some light. If I'm a Christian and I'm still harboring deep resentment to a person or a bunch of people just because I'm saved, is it okay for me to think I don't need to work on that resentment or possibly forgive them if I can? It's okay just to do nothing?
That's my concern, is that we have made the gospel so... The gospel is simple. Salvation is free, but it is not cheap. There are responsibilities. Jesus says, hey, if you don't do my works, I've just said you in the last chapter 5, chapter 6, and all of chapter 7, and he says right at the end, if you don't do the things I've said, you're building on a house of sand. There is definitely something to be said that requires a change in us. And I think that's where I am concerned. As a Protestant pastor, that is the risk for most of the people I pastor, most
Why
of the people
is
in
that?
our world. Because I think the pendulum has swung and understandably had to swing away from salvation by works. But I just think that for many it has swung too far the other way, so that we devalue the importance of the ethical, moral Christian life because we've made it all about salvation by faith. I've prayed a prayer. I'm now saved. Therefore, it doesn't really matter what I do with my life. And I just take a step back from that and go, that's not what the Bible is talking about. You have to skip the book of James. You have to skip Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and lots of other places if you have that mentality.
Okay, what if I'm a Christian and I believe I should look after the poor, and so I write a check once a month. I donate $200 or whatever to a charity. Is that enough?
I can't say whether that's enough or not, but you can say whether that's enough or not.
Okay.
That's incumbent on all of us. For some people, $200 is nothing. For some people, that's a massive sacrifice.
So I can give that $200 and not have a changed heart?
Yes, that's the other side of it. Is you can our world is full of rich benefactors who and what's the word when people give lots of money? What are they called? Rich people that give lots of money? I think the term now. It'll come back to me in a moment. But people who
lovely people.
Well, not always. So they're philanthropists. Philanthropists is the word I'm after. Our world is full of rich philanthropists. But oftentimes it's like, well, I want my name on that thing. I want to be known for philanthropy and all that sort of stuff. And you're getting into issues of the heart now.
That's complicated.
It gets complicated, and that is the issue of the heart. So that's why I say I can't say whether or not one person's act is right or wrong, but all I can say is I can look at my own heart, and I've got to be able to be in a clear conscience before God go, Lord, am I showing favoritism? Lord, do I does my life, does the allocation of my time and my talent and my treasure, does it indicate, if I was to be audited by heaven, does it indicate the things that I value? And are those things the values that you have, the value of equality, the value of elevating the marginalized, the poor? Is it those kind of values that the way I conduct myself illustrates? And that's going to be different for all of us, but that's, I think, what's incumbent on us as Christians. And I think I wonder if a lot of Christians even ask that question. And I think that we haven't always encouraged people to ask that question.
Are you suggesting here there's an individualism to understanding what faith in action means for each person?
I think so. It doesn't mean we can do it in community. We can ask questions in community, but ultimately it's a conscience issue for each of us. It shouldn't be me saying, Jeanie, you give $200, I only give $100, therefore you're more, spiritual than me. It's not about that. It's about looking in our own hearts and honouring God with what he has entrusted us with in those areas of our time and our talent and our treasures. And I just don't know that we've even encouraged people to ask that question enough.
Because I could go down to a soup kitchen, you said that before.
Yeah.
I could go down there and I could serve soup all day but not be changed person.
Yep.
I could go down there and do it out of some sort of duty or
pride.
Or pride,
Mm-hmm.
yes, definitely pride. Yes, or even what's that word where you self-flagellation?
Yeah, self-flagellation, almost like, oh, look at me, I'm a suffering. Exactly,
Yes.
all of those things.
Could do it that. But my heart can be not changed at all in that
And then
moment.
you can have right next to you a person serving soup who has had a radical life transformation and is doing it out of gratitude. Like the woman, Jesus says, the one who's been forgiven much loves much. That's the whole washing, the anointing with oil conversation that Jesus has. That's why we can't look at the works automatically as a sign of what's going on inside our heart. But James's argument is faith without works is dead. If you have faith, works will be a result. I can't guarantee that everybody who's doing good works is doing it for the right motive. But I can guarantee, James has put it the other way, but I can guarantee if you have faith and you don't have works of any kind, you definitely don't have faith.
Wow. Okay. That's a very strong statement, isn't
it? That's what he's saying. It's dead.
It's dead.
It's dead. So that doesn't mean everyone out there doing works is doing it with the right motives, but he's saying, but if you're not doing anything, you don't have faith.
How often do the churches say that to people?
Not often enough, and that's what I think my concern is. Because we put out, let's put it this way, we measure works as, oh, you come to church regularly and you volunteer and you tithe, for instance, right? All valid and really good things, right? I think those things should be flowing out of our faith. But the life of a generous, faithful believer has to be much bigger than that. Because you can do those things through a sense of duty as well. You can have people who are faithfully turning up to church, but they're self-flagellating. You can have people who faithfully give, but they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. So once again, it's deeper into our heart. As a pastor, my call to people is what's going on inside your heart. Do that examination and make sure that your actions match your heart.
This sounds like something you need to spend time with in prayer before God, because he knows what action will be brought about by a change in your heart.
Yeah, good.
And we often don't know that. But you know what? Sometimes we do know that, because I know it would be very easy for me to go serve in a soup kitchen, but it would be very difficult for me to say serving kids' church.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good example. It's very likely God will ask us to do the one that's the most painful. But you're right, exactly. That's a good example of it. So,
and I feel like I might be walking a fine line. Like, I'm serving here, see these people I'm serving, but knowing that this area of my heart, that's close to you. You can't have that.
That's the conscience issue.
I am not doing that on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the conscience issue right there. Yeah. Which we can't answer for each other, but
no, we can't. And that's what the more I read this, the more I understand this is it's highly individualized.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
And here it talks about an individual as an example. Wasn't our ancestor Abraham, in verses 21, made right with God by works when he placed his son Isaac on the sacrificial altar? Isn't it obvious that faith and works are yoked partners? The faith expresses itself in works, that the works are works of faith. The full meaning of believe in the scripture sentence, Abraham believed God and was set right with God, includes his action. I never thought about that in the way that he says it. It was the act of putting Isaac there that shows his belief. Yes. His action showed his belief.
Yeah, that's right.
And trust.
Becomes more. So I think the amplified version of the Bible often says, for the word faith, has something like have faith, trust in, and adhere to. So it's got this sense that it's more than just mental assent to believing in something. Faith is actually going all the way to risk your life and the promises of God upon something. I'm all in is what the kind of faith is. And that's why he's using this extreme example of Abraham, because he's all in on the promise. He's prepared to surrender everything, and that's the very act that God says that he commended. Ironically, it's this very thing that Martin Luther picked up on. The just shall live by faith. Martin Luther's premise was coming from Abraham having faith by his actions. So that's the crazy thing about it. The just shall live by faith. Well, it was actually Abraham's faith in action by willing to give the sacrifice, offer his son back, which proved his faith.
And look what this would have done to Abraham. This is the action. He would have felt very uncomfortable, I imagine. I can't imagine he would have been very willing to do this. It would have been a wrestle within his spirit. It would have been confrontational later on to Abraham and Sarah.
Yep.
Yep. Where's my son?
What did you do? Well,
I did something. I did something great.
Yes, I did something great. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All of those things surrounding this moment, and so I can imagine him sort of sweating, from within, stressed in this moment, but trusting that this and having belief that this action was expressing his faith to God.
Yep. I'm all in faith. I probably talked about this on the podcast before. I remember Nicky Gumbel on the Alpha course using an example of I think it's famous French tightrope walker that was walking across Niagara Falls, and he set up the tightrope to go across, and he was going back and forward, and the crowds were gathering, and he had a wheelbarrow, and he was pushing a wheelbarrow back and forth on the tightrope. And he said, "Do you believe I'm able to do this?" And they said, "Yeah, we believe you are." And he goes, "Okay, who wants to jump in the wheelbarrow?" And he was using that example to show the difference between belief and faith.
Right.
Because it's easy to stand on the shore, stand on the sideline and say, "Yeah, I believe you can push the wheelbarrow," but it takes real faith to get in the barrow.
Yeah.
And trust to that level that, okay, he's going to actually not drop me into the middle of the Niagara Falls as we cross over here. That's the kind of all-in faith that's being advocated for here.
And for this moment, for Abraham, the faith was that he believed God was not going to
fail him
and take his son.
That's right. He believed, Hebrews will tell us God believed that Abraham believed that God could raise the dead. So even if he did offer his son, God would bring him back to life. That's what Hebrews says was the amount of faith that Abraham had.
So he was acting on the assertion, belief, everything that he was not going to have to kill his son or his son would be brought back to life. All right, got it.
All in faith.
And that's why it says it's that mesh of believing and acting that got Abraham named God's friend.
Yes, very good. That's what he's advocating for here. He's saying he's using it as an example, remember, to say if you want to demonstrate true faith, then your actions will back that up.
He uses another example, being Rahab.
Yes.
Yeah, Rahab, who it wasn't her action in hiding God's spies and helping them escape. That seamless unity of believing and doing what counted with God. I can get that.
You can get it. She's putting herself on the line by hiding the spies. She sends the scarlet cord out the window. She is putting it all in. She stands to lose. If anyone finds out in her town, she's done.
And she was not an Israelite.
She was not an Israelite.
She didn't really have any formal instruction or knowledge of God or anything, nope. But she just did what she believed was right. She believed in their God.
Yes,
in that sense.
She believed in the promise and the faithfulness of those two spies who said, "Hey, if you do this, we will protect you and we will bring you in." And it ultimately led to Rahab being included in the family line of Jesus. Yes. So she's all in as well, and put at risk to her own livelihood has put all her eggs in one basket, the basket of God's promise.
What do you think the church would look like if we were all in for Christ?
Well, I only wish. If we could live that way, if I could live that way, not just everybody else, but if all of us could live that way, we would be an unstoppable force on this earth.
An unstoppable force for good, we
Absolutely.
should say.
Should clarify that.
Yes.
An unstoppable force for good.
Of love, of forgiveness, of charity, mercy, grace, kindness.
The earth around us would look a lot more like the kingdom if we all did this as Christians, if we all lived this way.
I just want to state that it's not us mobilizing as a war on people. It is us mobilizing to lay down arms in love for our neighbour.
Yes.
Which is what James is wanting us to do here.
Yep, that's right. And he'll go on and talk about speech and all kinds of things, the way we do it, the way we conduct ourselves. In this case, he's saying, avoid the favouritism, all that kind of stuff.
So if I have faith, my act of faith is best expressed in loving others.
Yeah.
And in loving others, there should be all the fruits of the Spirit. And if you see that in my life, then you know that I'm a Christian.
Yes. With all the caveats we just said, that some people can look like they're loving, but maybe they're not.
Okay.
But generally speaking, yes. But definitely the opposite is true. If you don't see those things, you can't be sure that there is faith. So if someone is claiming to have faith and not showing those things, I think that James would say you haven't got faith.
Okay.
But that should be the desire. I should be able to look at Jeannie's life and say, I can see the faith that Jeannie has because of the way she lives her life out.
Don't look too close.
Well, that should be sobering for all of us, shouldn't it? It's staring in the mirror right there. We're looking at ourselves in the mirror.
And this chapter ends with a warning: separate faith and work. Separate faith and works, and you get the same thing: a corpse.
I love it. Faith without works is dead.
Yes.
Separate them, you get a corpse. Yep, same thing. Yep, you cannot have one without the other.
Yeah.
That's faith without works. That's chapter 2.
Done for me.
All right, that's done for you. All right, we'll do chapter 3. Talk to you next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?